All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lisa Versace, and I am the Programs and Engagement Manager here at the California Preservation Foundation. A CPF is a 501c3 nonprofit organization providing statewide leadership, advocacy, and education to ensure the protection of California's diverse cultural heritage and its historic places. Our work is made possible by the generous support of our members, donors, and sponsors. We offer complimentary two-year memberships to students and individual memberships starting at just $50 annually. Our website, californiapreservation.org, is where you can find more information on membership, future programs, and events. Today's program is brought to you by our annual education sponsor, WJE, as well as our program sponsor, Groundwork Planning and Preservation. We are joined today by guest speaker Rita Cofield, an architect, public historian, and cultural resources manager, and most recently an associate project specialist at the Getty Conservation Institute. If at any time during the program you have questions for Rita, we encourage you to put them into the Q&A. You can find the box for this down at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, go all the way to the right and click the more with the little circle icon and three dots, and you should see a Q&A menu. Following Rita's brief presentation, we'll be doing our best to get to everyone's questions in the time allotted. Rita will be further introduced by today's moderator and program sponsor, Education Co-Chair Gretchen Hilliard-Boyce. Gretchen is a historian and preservation planner with over 20 years of experience working in the public and private sectors, and is the founder of Groundwork Planning and Preservation, a cultural resources consulting practice providing a full range of historical and cultural resource consulting services. And with that, I will turn it over to Gretchen to get today's program underway.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm just going to briefly introduce Rita before we have her give a little presentation, and then we'll do an interview-style discussion and answer your questions after that. So Rita Cofield is a cultural resources manager and neighborhood preservationist. She joined the Getty Conservation Institute in 2022 to lead the African American Historic Places Los Angeles project, which fosters innovation and collective community memory when it comes to caring for historic resources in African American neighborhoods throughout the city of Los Angeles. Rita is passionate about finding ways to reinsert multiple perspectives into the larger narratives of our collective history. She was born, raised, and still lives connected to the Watts community, where she volunteers as the interim executive director for the Los Angeles-based cultural arts organization Friends at Mafundi, and received her BA in architecture and planning from Howard University and an advanced degree in heritage conservation from the University of Southern California. On the side, Rita stage manages theatrical productions throughout the United States in order to sharpen her creative skills. I definitely want to hear about that too. So with that, Rita, I'll turn it over to you, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Gretchen and CPF and Lisa and Antonio for just inviting me to be here with you folks today. I'm going to share my screen. Go. And yeah, super excited to be in the sort of in these first halls. I feel like emerging professionals, there's like a hall in the CPF of emerging professional series, and I get to be one of those presenters. So thank you guys. And for those of you who are joining, yeah, I'm really excited to hear feedback and questions, because my trajectory is all over the map. But I got here and I love preservation. So with that, like Gretchen said, I consider myself a public historian. I routinely engage in collaborative work when working on history projects for non-academic consumption. So that's why I consider myself a public historian who also preserves and interprets history, advocates for under-recognized and underserved communities, and also helps to ensure that progress of development doesn't cancel out the protection of cultural heritage. I also produce historical films and manage historical stories for theater, and I make it a point, like Gretchen said, to reinsert multiple narratives into the larger narrative of our collective history. and I'm Associate Project Specialist at Getty Conservation Institute, and I'll get to how I got there, which is one of 4 programs that make up Getty. And I joined GCI, or Getty Conservation Institute, in 2022 to lead the African American Historic Places Los Angeles project. I'm also a child of parents who were part of the post-World War II migration out west. My dad and mom moved from Texas to Mississippi, respectfully, and during the 1960s for better job opportunities and to escape the discrimination that was happening in their cities. They were domestic workers with little education who managed to provide legacies for their offspring. So where I grew up, which is just outside of Watts in the Florence-Firestone area, and have served my community in various capacities, has shaped what I care most about, my career path, and also my areas of expertise. The Florence-Firestone area, like I'm literally, my backyard is, if you step out my backyard across the alley, I'm in Watts. So I'm just on the other side of like the county line in the Florence-Firestone area. So I still consider Watts my community. I still live where I was born and raised, in my mom's home, and I volunteer my time in matters of art, culture, and neighborhood preservation. Like Gretchen said, as the interim executive director for the Los Angeles-based cultural organization, Friends at Mafundi. And I always like to throw this in there because every opportunity I get to sort of shift and change the narrative of places, I take that. So most people know Watts for the 1965 rebellion, which is a false narrative because the rebellion didn't even happen inside the boundaries of Watts. But it's also a community that's connected with the Harlem Renaissance, the Black Arts movement, and the Central Avenue Jazz nightlife, and a plethora of artists. So with that, my adventures, my career adventures and trajectory. Let's see, I've done quite a few things throughout my career, as you heard and as you see. After graduating Howard University in DC, I worked in architecture firms, both in DC and here in Los Angeles, for about 15 years. But I grew increasingly impatient with the tedious drafting and measuring of homes and the repetitive house plans and preparing construction documents. So in a last-ditch effort to reevaluate my architecture career, I started to go through sort of my old college papers and classes and projects that I enjoyed, and found that actually it was conservation and archaeology and enhancing and building off of what was already built that I enjoyed and wanted to do more. So I volunteered with local theaters to take a break from the monotony of the drafting work, and thought that maybe set design would be a natural transition. Instead, I ended up enjoying behind the scenes work, stage managing. I got not dragged into, but talked into, not knowing anything about it. And I got good at it. I enjoyed it. So I did both architecture and stage managing for a long while. And theater is actually where I learned to manage the integrity of artistic visions. And that work in theater actually solidified my desire to study preservation as a career. So in between times, I taught elementary and high school as a long-term substitute, where I educated. I helped the kids to tell their stories. I've co-produced a few documentaries. One won a Daytime Emmy this year called Leveling Lincoln. But I knew if I wanted to meet the minimum standards to work closely with historic resources, everywhere I looked, you needed a degree. But I wasn't sure if it was the right career fit for me. So I took a summer intensive course in heritage conservation at USC. And like I found my peoples. The next semester, I was enrolled full-time, and I started in 2011 and ended my time there in 2021. And I got to study things that validated my desire to not only preserve the built environment and, my love of architecture, but also to manage the change in underrepresented neighborhoods and help communities to tell their own stories as a focal point for future reinvestment and revitalization. So just as I finished my my thesis in May of 21, the position of project leader for the African American Historic Places LA project, or AHPLA, AAHPLA, came into view. Several people emailed me. They were like, "Hey, Rita, are you going to apply for this?" I was like, yeah, sounds like it would be fun. I didn't think that I had the experience, but I knew that I could do the job. So I joined Getty. I was hired by Getty, and I joined them in March 2022 to manage the day-to-day activities of AHPLA. And I believe I was hired because of my successful community engagement work in Watts, my thesis, which focused on community-based preservation in Oakwood, my professional studies in architecture and preservation, and also the skills that I possessed to manage multiple moving parts and relationships that I gained while stage managing. So some of the day-to-day, thank you for the heart. Some of the day-to-day activities, well, first of all, I'll tell you that African American Historic Places LA is another groundbreaking partnership between Getty and the city that builds on a previous partnership that resulted in Survey LA. Some of you are familiar with Survey LA. It was the most comprehensive survey done in any major city, where they surveyed land parcels, over 880,000 land parcels, and established a framework for identifying and managing historic and potentially historic resources in Los Angeles. And that survey resulted in a customization of GCI's Arches open source software platform that became Historic Places LA. My favorite, one of my favorite search engines. They're getting better and better. You can put in themes now. You can put in architects. You can put in women architects and sort of curate your own search and what you find on it. There was also 10 ethnic cultural context statements that came out of the survey and that were created from the data of the survey, including the African American History of LA Context document, which is what my project, AHPLA, will build off of. I'm embedded both at the City of Los Angeles Planning's Office of Historic Resources, where I work at the FIG office downtown with Ken Bernstein, who's a project partner, principal city planner and manager of Los Angeles City Planning's Office of Historic Resources and Urban Design Studio. I also work with the OHR staff there, Melissa and Lambert, as we coordinate the sites that are brought forward for designation. And here at GCI, or there at GCI, because I'm working from home today, I work with project manager Sarah Lardenoy, research specialist Gail Ostergren, senior project coordinator Michaela Shea, and our current graduate interns, Kira Williams, our graduate intern, and our undergraduate intern, Orisha Lamont. So I have a team of folks. So this isn't just me doing the work, but I lead the day-to-day activities. It's been about 2.5 years working on the project, and I am still excited that I get to do something that I seem to have been pointed in the direction to do, although roundabout, which is sort of to highlight resources and tell a fuller story of American history and advocate for communities to tell their own stories. Some of the work that I do is engage community to drawing upon community's local knowledge. I work with a team of advisors and community leaders to identify sites of significance to Black history in LA, those that are in the survey and those that are not in the survey. I help prepare contracts and choose consultant teams that'll do the work of the project, including updating and refining the African American History of LA Context document, officially designating historic sites, that are associated with African American heritage, and developing better preservation strategies that are outside of the designation for 3 historically African American neighborhoods. I also get to work with the project team and OHR to identify current land use planning and policies to support anti-racist outcomes at the local government level. And that's, throughout not just us doing the work or the work of the project, but the city is looking at that outside of our project as well. I get to seek out potential collaborators with others doing similar work within and outside of Getty. We have within Getty, at the Getty Research Institute, there's the AHI initiative, the African American Art History Initiative, that I get to collaborate with and talk to about the work that I'm doing and they're doing. And also outside of Getty, the National Trust for Historic Preservation and LA Conservancy are working on a women's landmark initiative that's very parallel and similar to the work that we're doing at Getty. So we get to have conversation with them about what they're doing and collaborate in some of the methods that they're using to designate and highlight women's history. I get to explore potential partnerships with external organizations. I supervise paid interns to advance the field of preservation, and I get to help plan for the future activities of the project, which is a toolkit workshop, a training and dissemination of the outcomes, and a public programming part of the project. So my life has been super enriched by what I get to do. I'm still learning and growing in the preservation profession. And I'm grateful for my project team, both at Getty and OHR, and for our interns that bring such a youthful perspective, and also our advisors on the project, and especially local communities who are integral to the project's success and also to my professional success. So with that, I think I'm like 3 minutes over. My apologies. I will stop talking now and stop sharing.
You're not over. That was perfect.
Okay, good.
Wow. I don't even know where to start. I have so many questions for you, and I encourage everyone to please put your questions in the Q&A box. I always prioritize the audience questions because I have a million of my own, but I'll start with mine, Rita, and then see what people ask. I'm so curious because one of the things that I've kind of learned about preservation over the years is that if there's no one that has like a personal connection to something, it kind of doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the consultants come in and say it's significant or not. The community-based significance and value is really critical. And I think it's so cool that you sort of started out in your own community and like kind of got your interest in preservation, it sounds like, in your community. I just wonder if you can speak to that a little bit. Like, what do you see in the community and how is that personal connection important to preservation?
Yeah, I think it's strengthened my understanding of not just preserving buildings, but preserving communities. So I was, my first nomination was the Mafundi building, or the What's Happening Cultural Center, that was didn't have any protections for being developed for housing. There were no protections to prevent it from being demolished and the community said it was important. The community knew it was important. So I was already in school. I think I was, maybe in a couple of years from finishing my thesis, but the community came to me and said, hey, we know you're doing sort of this area. We need your help. So I was always like helping my community. I did a beautification project, like probably 5 or 10 years before I nominated the building to be designated. So it was all about storytelling, and how do you theater is storytelling. But who's telling that story? Who gets to tell that story? Who's given access to the stories that are being told? So it was always like a part of who I was and just what I was naturally drawn to. So being able to do that for my community to help, to designate, to write the nomination, I was like, oh, this is not just about like telling the story of a building and its architecture. Like it's about the community. And it's about, linking the past with the future. That's why you see on my last slide, it's a Sankofa bird, which the feet are facing forward. Sankofa means to go back and get. So the feet are facing forward where you are moving forward, but the bird's head is turned around, getting what looks like a seed. So getting that knowledge and being okay with going back and getting that knowledge and bringing it forward. So, we always say, if you don't remember the past, you are bound to repeat it. But also those good things that are about our collective history, we need to remember those things and bring them into the present. So it was sort of teaching me and getting involved in that designation, that it's community. It's because without the community rallying for it, and after it's saved, if the community doesn't have a connection to it, like it's just sitting there as a relic. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting too, because it's like, not only do you have to have people that care about something for preservation to really be effective, but you also have to make it valuable to the current state of the world or current place, right? It's like, we can't just, I think we're moving away as a field from like preserving things in amber. I think most people would agree that doesn't work if there's not a contemporary need or use for the historic place, whether it's a building or something else. Yeah. Okay. We're getting some questions here. Let's see. Someone asked a question just specifically about the point you were making about community history. Like, what is the importance of oral history, or do you have any experience with using oral history as a tool?
Yes,
stories.
One of the things that we are collecting we call them listening sessions. So they're subject matter oral histories, very short clips, where people are telling us about, places that matter to them, in refining and expanding the African American History of LA context document. Our advisors said that there was a theme missing. It was sports. It's like, we have what? Black people are connected to sports. Why isn't it in there? So that was something that was missed. So going out and collecting stories that people have to tell about about things that are connected to that theme. So we do use oral histories, the abbreviated version, and not like the oral histories that are extensive, but using people's knowledge and them telling place-based stories help to guide and define the updating of the context statement, and also locating additional sites that, I've gotten, folks in our listening sessions to name places that are like, where's that? What is that? I want to know more about that. And we should put that on our list of places to designate, and for other people and other organizations to designate. So yes, oral histories are important, because people, when you go buy a space, I don't care how great of a preservationist you are, you don't know that space, so you don't know it's important, but the community does. And to help them, giving them a platform to tell those stories and to tell those places and to give us those places, it just strengthens the not only the project, but like the collective knowledge of what's out there.
Great. That's really helpful. All right. Next question is, I'm just going to read it. It says, I'm curious about the angle of creating content about history and preservation for public consumption rather than academia. For an emerging professional coming out of academia, how does one maneuver their career towards a more public-facing career that involves storytelling and outreach?
Well, know your audience. It's like, who are you telling the story to? It's different if we have to cater our presentations to different audiences. If I was, presenting, before, I don't know, like a university, their interest and their focus is on something different. They would probably want to hear more about you know, sort of the preservation work, not my trajectory. They could probably care less about my trajectory. So I think knowing your audience, and also knowing the communities too. Like communities have different stories. They have different struggles. We are working with 3 historically African-American communities, and they have their needs and how they got there actually intersect. All of them, it's Pacoima, Oakwood, and Central Avenue corridor, the Central Avenue Jazz corridor, from the historic Central Avenue going all the way down into Watts. They were all created by being hemmed in by segregation. That's what they have in common. But they all want to talk about and highlight things that are different. So it's knowing the community, knowing what they're interested in, how to engage them, and knowing what's important, to their communities. And along Central Avenue, those things are like, there is nothing left that harkens back to the jazz era, except for the Dunbar. So that community is interested in not building new monuments or even celebrating monuments, but celebrating the heritage of jazz and celebrating it through a multicultural lens. Whereas Oakwood and Pacoima, they're very specific. They have places that are left that they want to make sure that people know that Black folks lived here. So it's knowing your audience and being able to, speak to them. I don't want to use the word on their level, but speak to them in terms of what's important, and knowing, again, just knowing your audience.
There's so many directions we could go. I want to ask this question that Eliza just threw in the chat because I think it's relevant. She says, as a Black person from a marginalized community, i.e. Watts, whose history is often overlooked or either retold through an alternative lens, how did you galvanize support for preservation for your community by individuals that with no relationship to it? I don't know if that's really the case.
Yeah, they all had, but there were some that had no relationship to it that had all the power. And that was the city that was making the call to not put into the request for proposal or the bid for consultants to say, this is important, don't tear it down. And it wasn't me. Let's be clear. It was griot in our community, an older gentleman by the name of Father Amdi Hamilton, who is a part of he's a part of the legacy of the building, and a legacy of his own. He's a part of the Watts Prophets, the renowned Watts Prophets, first album that had the word rap in it. Their music has been sampled by, KRS-One, Snoop Dogg talks about, their music. So he was the one, somebody put a bug in his ear and saying, hey, they're about to develop, the What's Happening Cultural Center, AKA Mafundi Building. They're about to develop it. It might get torn down, man. And so he, told the city officials, he met with city officials and said, hey, this is important. And this is why it's important. Cultural arts built by 2, African-American architects who are also connected to the civil rights in Watts. Kennard, Arthur Kennard and Robert Kennard and Arthur Silvers. So he was telling the story. He was trying to get them to pay attention to this story that was in this building that was not being told. And so, it's sort of like snowballed. He told someone, the community was like, they're not listening. How do we get a better traction? Somebody was like, Rita's in the community, let's talk to her. And we convinced the city officials to, one, stop saying the building wasn't in Survey LA. It was. Stop and put in there that the community deems it significant. And while you're doing that, we're going to go get it designated. So it'll be harder for you to demolish. So we did have to convince, and even people within our own community, they were like, you're trying to stop progress. It's like, no, preservation is managing change. We're not saying no housing. I was saying no housing, but I wasn't, the group wasn't advocating for, stopping housing development. We were just saying, do it in a way that doesn't, tear down, this once prominent cultural arts center there was nothing like it anywhere in any Black neighborhood at the time from 1970 to 1975 when it existed. And it was an amazing place for artists and creatives and, kids to come, and, people came from outside of the community to teach and learn. So we did have to sort of convince, but it was, and we always, like, that's why I start with that narrative about Watts. Like, everywhere I go, everywhere, our, community goes, it's like, yeah, it's not just the Watts Towers, and it's not just the 65 Rebellion. So we kept telling the narrative that was a fuller story. Even in my nomination, like, I started with like 2 paragraphs, had to cut it down. But it was like this, you need to know the background of this place. It doesn't start where you think it starts. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's such a like non-typical content, but typical trajectory of how, like, there's a development project proposed, somebody steps up and says, hey, wait a second, this is important, and then you organize and get the ball rolling and trying to save something, which is super valuable. But I'm interested in how, with the work that you're doing at the Getty now, it's a way more proactive approach, which I think is only in maybe the last decade are we even seeing these kinds of contexts and efforts made to not just look at architectural history, but like community history and cultural history. So I'm curious, like, how does it feel to be on the proactive side? And is like, can you still get stuff done? Like, just like, what is that like? Because that's a rare opportunity, I think, to try to be more proactive and say, this is what we care about before it's threatened.
Yeah. And yeah, every time, things come up that are about to be demolished, like, I can hear the Cultural Heritage Commission and saying, like, where were you? Like, what? Don't wait till the 12th hour or till the 11th hour to bring these things up. And so being proactive feels good because it's good. And also we're being proactive because communities are already saying these places are important. Sometimes we haven't done a very good job at listening. So this project wants to listen to, listen to those communities to say, what do you, I mean, they have to fit within, the parameters of, the preservation ordinance and things like that. But even, we need to rethink that because there are examples of, even the Cultural Heritage Commission denying designation because of the lack of integrity for buildings. So, we're all kind of trying to figure this out. And this project is new, but people have been doing the work. The National Trust has been doing the work with their Cultural Heritage Action Fund, with their African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, like long before this project came along. LA Commons has been doing the work to highlight and celebrate cultural heritage long before this project came along. So it builds off of the work of other colleagues, but in a really unique way because we get to work with the city and sort of try and create or look at the processes that deny or that have denied or that make, women's heritage and underrepresented heritage like such a low percentage. I think now we're at 4% of the 1,300 sites, 1,300 locally designated sites that are associated with African Americans, like, is just risen to 4% since I started. And, it's not just the work of the project, but it's also people seeing, like you said, it's not just architectural significance. It's, it's also cultural significance. The city is working on an indigenous people's context statement. Like, it's all about who is telling these stories and who we not allow, because we shouldn't allow people to tell their own stories. We should, like, that should be just a no-brainer. It's not about allowing, it's making space for multi, like, I guess,
like multiple narratives. Is that
multiple narratives?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. I think It's interesting too that as part of the project, it's holistic, and then it's also looking at policies and sort of like you're building these kind of relationships with different communities. You're looking at the policies and why they maybe haven't allowed or encouraged, telling those below stories in the past. Like that's really powerful too, because that it's not just inventory. It's not just like, here's a list of all the things that are important, and then
Yeah.
sometimes nothing comes of that. Sometimes things don't get designated, or it's not used. The information is not always used.
Mhm.
So that's really neat. Okay, back to our audience questions. Switching gears a little bit. So this person says, I often see people who were trained as architects branch out from their traditional path and really thrive in their careers. Us Black women are so incredibly underrepresented as licensed architects. Do you think you would have been as successful if you had stayed in the more traditional architecture path?
Well, I went to Howard, the Mecca, the Black Mecca. So I think I would have been successful because I would have had support. But it wasn't, it was boring to me. And I wish I would have been pointed in the direction of doing architecture and conservation, heritage conservation, because I would have done both. I probably even would have, gotten my license and gone into become an architectural historian. But yeah, I think I would have been just as successful, because it's just as hard because I'm underrepresented. We are underrepresented, both as a female and also as as an African American, in preservation as well as architecture. So I think I would have had, a similar struggle, but because of the place that I was in, I think I would have been, yeah, I think I could have been just as successful.
Do you think too, like my experience has been that some of the academic programs, they don't really prepare you for what it's actually like to work in a field, it could, across the board, like you can be studying software developing or, architecture. Like, was that your experience too? Like, did you know what it was going to be like to work as an architect?
Yeah, I was not interested in having my own firm. And that was a big push, which is, kind of why all of my projects were like community based. It was like doing stuff, for Indigenous heritage. I was, building off of the culture. It was, focused on, being the next, Paul R. Williams or, Mies van der Rohe. And I was like, I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in the high end.
It's such a narrow path too, right? It's like not a lot of people actually get to do
And
that.
not a lot of people get there. Right, exactly. Which is probably why I was getting frustrated, because I'm like, I'm not getting anywhere. But had they, had I had a more grounded and realistic view of what I could do while waiting on that, maybe I would have stayed in a little longer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's understandable. There's actually in the audience, there's quite a few folks that are currently in USC's program. And so I'm wondering, like, why did you decide that you wanted to go get that heritage conservation certificate? And like, what was that like, in as a preparing you for working in the field? You're already kind of doing this work. So I'm just curious, like what prompted that step?
Well, I mean, one, I talked about like this whole like reevaluating, like, do I want to do architecture? Like, do I want to keep doing architecture? What are the things in architecture that I really enjoy? The built environment, and all these other sort of experience that I got. And I was like, it's conservation, it's heritage conservation. And where can I go where I'm not just getting theory, or I'm not just getting field training? And I mean, USC was the only one that had sort of both, and it was in my own backyard. And they also focused on community. And when I did the sort of dip my toe in, is this really what I want to do, by taking the summer the summer extensive course. And I think Ken Bryce, not I think Ken Bryce was the director of the program at the time, and he encouraged me, that my voice was needed, that my underrepresented voice was needed in the profession. And so I was like, okay, I can see myself being very helpful. I'm a very helpful person. So I could see myself being helpful in this field. And USC was like perfect. Everybody else was all the other programs that I looked at, they were either heavily theory based or heavily practical based. I think it was a good mix. And just tried it out with the extensive, like I said, when I got there, I was like, I found my people. This is what I could see myself doing for a very, very long time. And I like the work that I'm doing now, HPLA, like when I'm talking about it, when I'm having dinner, I'm like always thinking and talking about the work that I'm doing because it's so embedded into who I am. I mean, I'm going to community events just to go to community events. And it's like, okay, I'm off the clock, but I'm really interested in this stuff. I'm really genuinely interested in what I'm doing. And I'm genuinely interested in community and, preserving neighborhoods and managing, change. So it's just kind of a part of who I am. And preservation, I get to do that work and get paid to do that work. Yeah.
Well, and I'm going to push a little harder on this academic thing because we've had a lot of questions in these programs in the past about like, do I have to go back to school? And like, how important is it? Like, do you feel like that gives you any level of legitimacy that you feel like you need? Like, do you feel like you need that credential? Or because I don't know. I don't know how to advise people on that in some regards. Like,
well, what do you want to do? What I wanted to do was help communities, and why I went back for the degree and not just do the work was because if you're doing any, sort of government projects, you have to meet the Secretary of Interior standards as a professional. And that requires an advanced degree that requires, your master's or above. So I was like, well, guess I'm going back. So that was one of the reasons I did not want to go back to school. One of the reasons that I did go back to school is because the things that I wanted to do to help, to help people, to help communities required that expertise. Now, in the work that I'm doing now, it's like, I feel like communities are already experts at preserving their heritage. They've been doing it long before preservationists have been doing it. Like you go to churches, and they have, their archives, like they're not preservationist. You have, take, the people that are moving into, modern homes, they're taking care of those homes. They're not preservationist, so like you don't have to have a degree to do the work, but our society says if you want to get paid and you want to, get grants and things like that, you have to create legitimacy through, through your academic.
Yeah, a master's in preservation or related field is still the minimum qualification for most positions in the field, whether it be government or even consulting firms.
Yep.
I know a lot of consulting firms are trying to look at that and say, like, is that really necessary? Because you can meet the secretary standards by doing the work for several years, but it takes longer than if you have the degree. Then you only need I think it's like 1 year of practical experience. But if you don't have the degree, it takes longer. So it's interesting because that's like a pretty major hurdle for people. And Melody's question actually speaks specifically to that. So I'm going to read this. She says, as a Latina born and raised in Hollywood, I haven't had many opportunities in terms of higher education and internships. What opportunities are available to me? I went to school for museum studies and have since been struggling to find opportunities to further my experience and career in preservation and conservation. I think it's hard because of what we were just talking about.
I encourage, like Getty has internship program, and, museum it's sort of, for lack of a better word, going through the back door sometimes, although, the internship, that's at Getty that we're committed to for our project is specifically focused on, the heritage in the project, but like go through the back door. I almost did, what is that, to get some hands-on training, Conservation Corps, I think. There's the Hope
Like
Project.
AmeriCorps.
AmeriCorps, yeah.
Mhm.
There's also like there's another, it's similar to the National Trust hands-on preservation something Hope program, where you get hands-on work, but that's like an introduction, because the folks that are teaching you hands-on, but they're also teaching you about the preservation field. So kind of going through the back door, and taking, like, I read a lot, and I still read a lot about what's going on, reading about what's going on in the city, what different cities are doing with preservation. And there may not be opportunities here. There may be opportunities, elsewhere in other cities. But find your interest. Like, what are you interested in? Which part of the preservation field are you interested in? And then, like, start there. And I know that we are getting away from not paying our volunteers, because it's wrong. We should pay people for their knowledge, even if they're giving a little bit of knowledge. We should still pay for them. But I was willing to, like I volunteer with the theater. I was willing to just volunteer, to learn set design. Finding some mentors who are just willing to talk with me about stuff, and check in with me about the work that they're doing. Come to the Cultural Heritage Commission meetings.
Yeah, to kind of like observe what's going on.
Yeah.
I also would recommend, when I was early in my career, I used to always volunteer at the CPF annual conference. Like, if you volunteer, you get to go for free, and you get to meet everyone, like work the registration table. You get to meet everyone that comes in to register, and then you can start to make connections and follow up with those people. I think that most people in our field are very generous with their time and open to helping newcomers navigate through, figuring out networking and all that stuff. So that would just be one thing, Melody, specifically to like, that's one place you can start. And like, this is CPF, we're telling you, like, you're welcome to come and all that. So I don't know if that helps or not, but the academic credential thing is a real hurdle. A lot of positions, though, do say a degree in historic preservation or closely related field. So if you study museum studies or public history or something like that, it does count. So does history. Any of those kind of like related fields, you can make the argument that you qualify. It's harder if you don't have that experience already. Okay, and another question kind of related to this from Arnetta is that same level of expertise and degrees required for the consultants and collaborators that you secure for community projects? Like, so through the Getty, when you hire consultants, like what's required of them?
So we set up an opportunity for both. For those, I mean, we want everyone to have sort of an expertise, but for the consultants that are working on, when we were choosing and going after the consultants for the designation process, that was through the city. So those folks had to have relationship with the city and not licensed, but they had to go through the city process. So they were already city contractors. For the historic context statement, updating of the historic context statement, and also the neighborhood preservation strategies, we are using the usual suspects, but it's going to be under Getty, so hired by Getty and not the city. So we can go outside of, the sort of the usual suspects. But we are asking for someone on the team to have to meet the Secretary of Interior's interior standards for someone on the team, but it doesn't have to be everyone on the team. It doesn't have to be the lead consultant. It could be a sub-consultant who has that, but, you know, trying to get the unusual suspects, because we want something bigger and broader. We want to focus on not just architecture, but culture. We want to focus on the community. People with background, you know, in arts, with background in community engagement. All of those things are going to be important as we look at these sort of new strategies that communities want to see to celebrate and highlight the African-American heritage of them.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's also like potential to team with other people that might have the experience that you don't have, and then you gain the experience through the project. You know, it's like chicken and egg. Either you go to school and get the like credential, or you somehow gain that experience through partnering, through volunteering, through, you know, internships, stuff like that. For sure. All right. Finally, I'm getting to Jennifer's question. She's asking, how do you retain a preservation plan with a growing community that is removing properties from a historic register? That's a very specific question. I don't know
if I don't know if I'm dealing with that, but
yeah.
Okay, repeat the question again.
How do you retain a preservation plan with a growing community that is removing properties from a historic register? I assume maybe because of development pressure, like maybe, you know, properties are getting redeveloped and so things are being lost. I'm not sure, Jennifer, if you want to clarify in the chat your question, but maybe we can, so she's saying coastline development is a concern. So like, maybe I can reframe it, Jennifer, in a way that I think Rita can answer. So for the Getty project you're working on, so you're establishing this framework for, you know, African-American sites, policies, inventory, designation. You're like establishing this whole network. But what happens if, as you're setting up these policies, these properties are still probably being proposed for redevelopment, demolition? Like, how do you balance like keeping up with the day-to-day, what's still happening live on the ground versus establishing these bigger, longer term plans and visions for the future?
No, that's a great question. Opening up my city email very carefully and going, what's happening? What's happening next? You know, what's happening in, you know, in Oakwood? Kind of you know, this project is also trying to inform community, and for community to help communities to have agency over what is in their neighborhood. So, you know, as we're doing this, like part of the project, part of the scope of the work for the consultant, that's Architectural Resources Group that's working on the nominations, is for them to have what they call what we call shadowers. And the shadowers are community members or students who are interested in the process, to learn the process to designate. So it's empowering. You know, we may not be able to do anything, but the community is empowered to go, oh, wait a minute, you know, this doesn't look right. I want to do something about it. And knowing that process so that it's less scary, so that a developer is less likely to see a building that the community knows is historic and just like come in and take it without the community going, what, wait a minute, either before the developer comes or hopefully before the developer comes, because if it's developed for housing, then there's nothing that we can do about it once it goes into the planning process. It's a whole nother thing. So it's empowering. Like, I feel good that our project is empowering community to take agency, because we can't be there and see everything that's happening. But we can take the work of this project, you know, and sort of help communities to feel empowered, and also to feel empowered to say, hey, I want to bring this up as a place that should be designated, put it on the list somewhere. And as we put it on the list somewhere, you know, some of my stuff, you know, has gone over to Chris Morris, who's leading the Landmark Women's, the Women's Landmarks project. So we have partners, out there that are even looking, even organizations, nonprofit organizations that are looking for sites to designate, to support, So, I don't feel like we can, and the process is an iterative process. Even when we update and refine the African American History of LA context document, like 5-10 years from now, something else may need to be added. But empowering communities and empowering people to do something when they see something, I think is also part of the project, part of what the project is doing, so that we can, prevent, things from being demolished that, while we're trying to designate things, other things are being demolished. But if people know about it, and know how to know the process, to lessen or heighten the protections, then I think that's part of the work.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think that empowering the community, it's like that's the way we get it to like percolate broader than just preservation, right? Like preservation as a field. It's like, how do you get everybody working on it?
Yeah. How do you make everybody preservationists?
Yeah, or it's like you're going to be more effective if you have more people, more boots on the ground, people like paying attention to what's going on in their communities and trying to like raise awareness. That's the goal.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You kind of, I missed one of these questions from Andrea, but I realized we just kind of answered it in a way. She asked, have you done any work with community members writing their own monologues? And I think, I'm not sure what exactly, Andrea, you mean by monologues, but I think you just talked about how you're helping people write designations and learn how to write designations, which is like can be a very technical thing.
Yeah, we have our interns, two of our interns, one last year, Lauren O'Brien, graduate intern last year, and our graduate intern this year, Kira Williams, is writing a nomination, or wrote nominations.
Is it their first ones they've done, or is that's great.
And Lauren was a public historian. She's not a preservationist. Kira, of course, is a preservationist, but again, that process doesn't look so scary. And now they have the knowledge to go out and help, and guide, and get paid for it too.
Yeah, internships are an amazing way of breaking into the field. Like if they're competitive, it's hard to get them, obviously, but it's a great way to like try out something too. Like if you're not sure what it's like to work for a nonprofit, it's a great way to get a specific experience. We're hitting our 1 o'clock wall. So I have one more question I want to ask from Eliza, and then we'll wrap it up. So Eliza asks if you've utilized AI in any of your preservation projects. If not, do you feel it's a valuable tool that can be incorporated? And if so, how? I still think this should be a conference session this year about AI and the use of AI in our field, because it's starting and there's a lot of ethical concerns, I think.
It should, and I have. I've used it to create just a starter contract for our neighborhood preservation strategies, but it's all of it helped me to organize all of the stuff like that we've been talking about. So I input all of the information and AI just sort of organized it, and it still needs a lot more work. But it was helpful to organize like all these things that we've been talking about and what we want to get out of the strategies, and all of these things to sort of be organized in a way that, can now be more refined. So that's the only time that I've used it. I've been curious and asked it questions like, what are some of the barriers to preserving African American heritage?
What to say?
And it's funny, it pulled from our project. It pulled from information from our project.
That's good. At least it's finding the right source.
Yeah. I was like, oh, okay. And it lists even environmental justice issues. So it was really interesting. And I was like, it's pulling from sources. You still have to double check those sources.
Right.
Um,
That's an important part. I think
yeah,
people think it's going to just like do the work for them, and it can definitely, I think it can cut out some of your busy work and data crunching, but
yeah,
then it really needs to be checked because I mean, AI, especially like Chat GPT, like it says stuff with such confidence, the way it spits it back to you. And it's like, you don't know where they're, it's like aggregating sources from the entire internet. So it's like,
yes, from Wikipedia.
it's hard to fact check that stuff. So it's like, I think there's definitely some really good potential applications to it in our field, but there needs to be an understanding that it always needs to be checked
Always.
because
Yeah,
we are a fact-based field.
yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely, I think, gonna be in the next few years, there's gonna be some really interesting case studies for use of AI
yeah,
in our field and other places.
for sure.
Um, well, gosh, Rita, I feel like I could talk to you all day because I think it's really cool that you've had such a varied background because it
Yeah,
obviously you've pulled from all these different experiences to the work that you're doing now. And I really can see how like even being a stage manager helps you manage this multi-headed project with all these different
yeah,
stakeholders.
that's
So that's
true.
so cool to see. Thank you for your time. And I will
You,
just turn it over to Lisa to do a quick wrap up from CPF.
Yeah, I agree, Rita. It was a phenomenal program. And I think that especially just hearing, for a lot of people, myself included, who did not start their career in preservation, really hearing how you kind of managed to get your way here and you weren't afraid to do that later in your career, when maybe you needed to take a step down or a step sideways or kind of reconfigure your life a little bit to prioritize, really going after your passion, I think was really inspirational. So thank you so much, Rita, for leading us through your journey. Gretchen, I highly recommend you add that as a suggested
I've been thinking
conference
about it.
topic.
Yeah, I need some speakers. If anyone knows of anyone that's used AI that can be a speaker in my session, please reach out.
Thank you both. A really wonderful program. Thank you to Rita for being our guest, to Gretchen and Antonio, our education co-chairs, who've championed this emerging professionals series and really made sure to get it off the ground. We'll be announcing our next mentorship series, a guest, which will take place in October. We're hoping to announce that in the next couple of weeks. On behalf of myself, staff here at the California Preservation Foundation, our co-chairs, thank you to all of you for joining us today. We really hope you enjoyed this program. We hope you learned a lot from it and got something out of it, and hope that you will leave your feedback or suggest a future topic to us in the survey you'll be redirected to upon closing your window. I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoons, and we'll see you at our next Emerging Professionals program. Thank you again, Rita.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Rita.
See you.